What if a Nazi general everyone thought died in 1945 actually lived in a secret mountain fortress for 13 more years? In October 2020, a Chilean mountain rescue team was searching for missing hikers in the Andes. 90 miles east of Santiago, they were at 9,400 feet when they saw something strange. Behind a rockfall that had partially collapsed, there was a steel ventilation shaft sticking out from the mountainside. It was German industrial construction. Corroded, but you could tell what it was. 3 weeks later, authorities came to dig up the site. What they found shocked everyone. There was a blast door buried in solid granite, sealed with a combination lock that still turned. Behind that door was a whole network of tunnels and chambers carved 150 feet into the mountain. There were living quarters for 30 people, a command center with wall-mounted maps of South America, an ammunition storage room filled with German ordnance dated 1944 to 1945. But what they found next changed everything. In the commander's quarters, investigators discovered a leather journal. It was dated February 1946 to August 1958. The first entry started with these words: "We have arrived at our final position. The Reich lives in us." The journal was signed SS-Brigadeführer Otto Rahn. Here's the problem with that signature. German military records say Rahn was killed in action, defending Dresden in February 1945. He supposedly got caught in the firestorm that burned the city to ashes. His death certificate was issued by Soviet occupation authorities in June 1945. His widow got the notification and a military pension. For 75 years, the case was closed. Everyone believed he was dead, but forensic analysis told a different story. The journal's handwriting matched Rahn's captured war correspondence with 97% certainty. Dental records from human remains found in the bunker, remains buried in 1958, matched Rahn's Waffen-SS medical file perfectly. That Chilean mountain bunker had evidence that a high-ranking SS general didn't just escape Germany. He built a fortified compound and lived there for 13 years after the war supposedly ended. If you want to see what investigators found inside those tunnels and how Rahn pulled off one of the most successful Nazi disappearances ever documented, hit the like button. It helps us bring more buried World War II stories to light. Subscribe because the forensic evidence from that bunker challenges everything historians thought they knew about SS escape networks. Now let's go back to Dresden, February 1945, where Rahn was supposedly making his last stand. The official Soviet report said he died in a firestorm. The mountain bunker proves that was a lie. SS-Brigadeführer Otto Rahn commanded the 11th SS Panzer Grenadier Division. Nordland, from October 1944 until February 1945, he led a formation of mostly Scandinavian volunteers in Germany, a desperate defense against Soviet forces pushing in from the east. Born in Munich in 1902, what made Rahn different from other SS generals was his background in engineering and construction. Before the war, he worked for 6 years in his family's civil engineering firm. He specialized in tunnel construction for hydroelectric projects in the Bavarian Alps. His personnel file, declassified in 2001, shows expertise in rock excavation, structural reinforcement, and underground facility design. These were unusual skills for an SS combat commander, but they had earned him assignments overseeing fortification construction on the Eastern Front in 1942 to 1943. The 11th SS Division had been destroyed during the Soviet offensive through Poland in January 1945. They fell back in chaos with maybe 3,000 effective soldiers remaining from its original strength. By early February, Rahn's division was told to defend Dresden's S eastern approaches as part of Army Group Center S collapsing front. His command had exhausted troops, almost no armor, and supplies running out. They faced overwhelming Soviet superiority in numbers and firepower. Dresden's importance was more symbolic than military. The city housed hundreds of thousands of refugees running west. It contained cultural treasures and represented the last major urban center before Berlin. Hitler ordered fanatic defense. Local Nazi officials demanded the city be held at all costs. But professional officers knew Dresden couldn't be saved. The question was, how many would die trying? What made Rahn unique among SS commanders in early 1945 was his preparation for defeat. Intelligence files, declassified in 2015, show that between November 1944 and January 1945, Rahn made 3 unexplained trips to Switzerland, officially for medical treatment. But he spent time in Zurich's banking district. Swiss banking records investigated in 2018 revealed Rahn opened accounts under the name Richter and deposited huge amounts of gold reserves, likely looted from occupied territories, during those visits. Weather conditions in Dresden during mid-February 1945 were clear and cold. These were perfect conditions for the Allied firebombing on February 13th to 14th. The raids created a firestorm that killed an estimated 25,000 people and destroyed 90% of the city center. In that hell, keeping track of individuals, especially military personnel caught in the chaos, became impossible. None of them knew that Rahn had spent the previous 4 months quietly moving construction equipment, preserved food, supplies, and technical documentation to a location 7,000 miles away. A team of loyal SS engineers was already digging tunnels into an Andean mountainside. But Soviet intelligence reports from March 1945 contain a detail that would confuse investigators for decades. Rahn's supposed death site was examined by Soviet forensic teams. They found no remains matching his description, yet they issued the death certificate anyway. February 12, 1945, 1800 hours. Rahn holds his final staff meeting in a requisitioned schoolhouse in Dresden's Neustadt district north of the Elbe River. Present are his chief of staff, SS Obersturmbannführer Klaus Dietrich, his operations officer, and 3 battalion commanders from the division's remnants. According to testimony given by Dietrich during his 1947 British interrogation, he survived the war as a prisoner. Rahn announces the division will establish defensive positions along Dresden's eastern perimeter to delay Soviet reconnaissance units expected within 72 hours. Rahn assigns sectors to each battalion, specifies ammunition, distribution, and orders preparation of fallback positions. Dietrich later said this seemed like normal defensive planning, but he noticed Rahn looked distracted. He kept checking his watch and ended the meeting shorter than usual. 1930 hours, Rahn dismisses his staff, except for 2 men. His adjutant SS Hauptsturmführer, George Steiner, and his driver, SS Unterscharfer, Friedrich Koch. Both men were from Rahn's personal staff. They were selected from the Bavarian region where Rahn had grown up. This detail suggests personal loyalty over military skill. February 13th, 0600 hours. Rahn leaves Dresden in a staff car with Steiner and Koch. He tells Dietrich he's doing a personal reconnaissance of fallback positions 15 kilometers east of the city. Dietrich notices the explanation doesn't make sense tactically. Forward reconnaissance was usually given to junior officers, but he doesn't question a general's decision. 1,000 hours, no radio contact with Rahn's vehicle. This was unusual. Radio discipline was strict to avoid Soviet signal interception. 1,315 hours. British and American bombers begin the first wave of attacks on Dresden. The bombing is devastating. The city center explodes in flames. Firestorms develop, creating hurricane-force winds that pull oxygen from shelters and burn everything above ground. 1,600 hours. Dietrich is operating from a command post in the suburbs. He tries to reach Rahn by radio. No response. He assumes the general is taking shelter from the raids. February 14th, 0130 hours. A second wave of bombers hits Dresden. The firestorm gets worse. By dawn, the city center is a smoking ruin. Refugee, columns, military units, and city infrastructure are wiped out. Communications collapse completely. February 14th morning, Soviet forces take advantage of the chaos and speed up their advance. German units are falling apart. Dietrich takes tactical command of the division's remnants and orders withdrawal toward the American lines to the west. Surrendering to the Americans was better than Soviet capture. February 15th to 17th, no sign of Rahn. Dietrich questions soldiers who'd been in the eastern suburbs. Nobody saw the general's staff car. Multiple reports describe vehicles destroyed by bombing, bodies burned beyond recognition. Refugees and soldiers mixed together in the death toll. In the chaos, figuring out who died and where becomes impossible. February 20th. Soviet troops occupy Dresden completely. Soviet military intelligence begins processing captured German personnel and identifying casualties. The NKVD sets up a temporary morgue and documentation center in a surviving municipal building. Bodies are cataloged where possible, but most casualties from the firestorm can't be identified. just charred remains without distinguishing features or identification. March 5th, Soviet authorities put together casualty lists based on captured German military records, witness statements, and physical remains. SS-Brigadeführer Otto Rahn is listed as killed in action. Dresden, February 13th to 14th, 1945. The determination is based on his last known location in Dresden, his failure to report to any German unit afterward, and the assumption that senior officers wouldn't have run while their troops fought. June 12, 1945. Soviet occupation authorities issue a formal death certificate for Rahn. The certificate notes remains not recovered. Death presumed based on circumstantial evidence and witness statements. The document is sent to British and American intelligence as part of routine information sharing about senior Nazi officers. What happened during those 72 hours? Where Rahn actually went while Dresden burned and Soviet investigators documented a death that never occurred would stay unknown for 75 years, until Chilean mountain rescuers found a ventilation shaft that shouldn't exist. The Soviet death certification seemed solid enough. When British intelligence put together post-war lists of senior SS officers in 1946, Rahn was categorized as killed in action. Dresden firebombing, February 1945. His file had the Soviet certificate, notes from witnesses who'd last seen him in Dresden on February 13th, and a case closed stamp dated August 1946. Rahn's widow, Helga, got official notification in July 1945 from Soviet authorities through the German Red Cross widow's pension. West German authorities eventually granted it in 1952. Helga lived in Stuttgart until her death in 1981. She never publicly questioned the official story. Their daughter Margrethe, age 8 when her father supposedly died, was interviewed by a German journalist in 1995 for a book about SS generals. She said, "My mother told me he died a soldier's death defending Germany. We accepted that, but contradictions existed for anyone looking at the file closely, which few did. The most significant problem was buried in Soviet forensic reports. Declassified in 2002, NKVD teams had examined the presumed death site, the eastern Dresden suburbs, where Rahn's staff car was supposedly caught in the firestorm. The forensic report, dated March 1st to 4th, 1945, documented examining 47 vehicles destroyed in that sector. The report noted no staff car matching description of SS general's vehicle identified. No remains found matching physical description of Brigadeführer Rahn, height 183 centimeters, blood type AB. Despite this finding, Soviet authorities issued Rahn's death certificate 3 months later. The explanation in the file said, given totality of destruction and evidence of general's presence in Dresden, February 13th. Death is certain regardless of remains identification. It was bureaucratic closure, not forensic certainty. A second contradiction came from Rahn's subordinate officers' testimonies. SS Obersturmbannführer Dietrich was interrogated extensively by British intelligence. In 1947, he mentioned something odd. On February 10th, 3 days before the bombing, Rahn had authorized the release of 12 men from the division. Officially transferred to Waffen-SS administrative duties in Munich, Dietrich found this unusual because the division was desperately short on men. When he questioned it, Rahn replied tersely, "Orders from Berlin." But Dietrich later testified no such orders existed in the division's paperwork. Those 12 men disappeared from records entirely, never reported to Munich, never listed as casualties, simply vanished. A third problem appeared decades later. In 1978, a Swiss banking inquiry into dormant Nazi-era accounts identified an account opened in November 1944 under the name Otto Richter, a common German surname unlikely to draw attention. The account contained gold deposits worth approximately $400,000 in 1945 currency. The account stayed active until 1959 when the final withdrawal closed it. Swiss authorities investigated whether Otto Richter was a cover identity for Nazi assets, but found no solid connection. The file noted Rahn's middle name was Otto, and Richter was his mother's maiden name, but investigators dismissed it as coincidence. Nazi officers commonly used family names for aliases. This lead went nowhere without additional evidence. The case? stayed closed for 75 years because Rahn occupied a bureaucratic gray area. He commanded an SS combat division, but wasn't specifically accused of war crimes. The 11th SS Nordland Division fought conventional military battles and wasn't connected to Holocaust operations or civilian massacres. Nazi hunters focused on concentration camp personnel, Einsatzgruppen commanders, and officials directly involved in genocide. An SS general killed in Dresden's firestorm wasn't a priority target. Rahn's name appeared occasionally in academic books about the Waffen-SS and Dresden's destruction, usually in footnotes listing senior officers killed during the battle. His family kept low profiles, no dramatic deathbed confessions or mysterious letters came out. The historical record showed an SS general who died in one of the war's most destructive bombing raids. Tragic but unremarkable among millions of wartime deaths. For decades, the Andes Mountains kept their secret. Until October 2020, when rescuers found a ventilation shaft in solid granite, what those rescuers discovered would force investigators to look at every detail of Rahn's final days in Dresden again and prove that the 12 transferred soldiers were actually the advance team for an elaborate escape operation. The Chilean bunker stayed hidden for 75 years because nobody was looking. In the right place, after the war, Nazi hunters focused on Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil. Countries with large German immigrant communities and documented Nazi presence, Chile received less attention. Its German community was smaller, more integrated, and historically came before the Nazi era by decades. Allied intelligence assumed most SS officers who reached South America stayed in urban centers where German communities could provide support and anonymity. The 50th anniversary of V-Day in 1995 brought renewed interest in Nazi escape routes. British journalist Gerald Posner's book, Hitler's Children, examined ratlins through Italy to South America, but focused on known destinations. Buenos Aires, Sao Paulo, and Chile mountain regions weren't investigated. The terrain was harsh, remote, and seemingly unsuitable for fugitive Nazi officers seeking comfortable exile. Technology that could have found Rahn's bunker earlier didn't exist, or wasn't used. Satellite reconnaissance of Chilean Andes wasn't systematically done until the 2000s. Initial surveys focused on geological features for mining exploration, not historical archaeology. Ground-penetrating radar, sophisticated enough to detect underground structures through solid granite, became commercially available only in the 2010s. The ventilation shaft was hidden by natural rock formations and overgrown vegetation, invisible from aerial surveys. Geopolitical factors also mattered. During Chile's military dictatorship under Augusto Pinochet, 1973 to 1990, the government maintained friendly relations with German expatriate communities and showed little interest in investigating potential Nazi connections. Pinochet himself admired German military traditions. Any inquiries about German activity in remote mountain regions would have been discouraged or blocked. One potential witness never came forward. Friedrich Koch, Rahn's driver, who supposedly went with him on February 13, 1945, was never definitely accounted for after the war. German records list him as missing in action. Dresden, 1945. But unlike Rahn, no death certificate was ever issued. Koch's family was contacted by researchers in 1998 for a book about missing Wehrmacht personnel. They said they'd received no official notification and assumed he died in Dresden's chaos. But they also mentioned receiving an unsigned postcard from somewhere in South America in 1953 with no return address. It said only, "I am well, do not search for me." The family kept the postcard but never reported it to authorities. In 2008, a German documentary filmmaker investigating SS escape networks interviewed elderly German expatriates in Chile. One man, speaking anonymously, mentioned hearing stories in the 1960s about old soldiers living in the mountains who spoke German and kept to themselves. He dismissed it as local legend, and the filmmaker didn't pursue the lead. Unverified rumors about Nazi holdouts in South America were common and usually proved false. The 75th anniversary of Dresden's bombing in 2020 brought brief media attention to the city's history, including lists of notable casualties. Rahn's name appeared in several articles as an example of senior officers killed in the raids. Nobody questioned the official record. The story seemed closed. Then, in October 2020, A hiking accident changed everything. The Chilean government immediately classified the site as historically significant and restricted access. A joint investigation team formed. It included Chilean archaeologists, military historians, German Federal Archives representatives, and forensic specialists. The site received protected status and systematic documentation. Began in January 2021. First priority was authenticating the journal. The leather-bound book was transported to Santiago's National Archives in a climate-controlled container. The journal contained 347 handwritten pages in German script dated February 12, 1946, through August 15, 1958. Forensic analysis began immediately. Paper dating using radiocarbon analysis confirmed the pages were produced between 1944 to 1946, consistent with German wartime paper manufacturing. Ink analysis matched chemical signatures of German military issue ink from the 1940s. The binding was German military standard issue for officer notebooks. Handwriting comparison was critical. German Federal Archives provided samples of Rahn's wartime correspondence, orders, reports, and personal letters from 1942 to 1945. Forensic document examiners compared letter formations, spacing patterns, pressure points, and signature characteristics. The analysis concluded with 97% probability that the Chilean journal and Rahn's wartime documents were written by the same person. Content analysis revealed the bunker's purpose and timeline. The first entry dated February 12, 1946, exactly 1 year and 1 day after Rahn's supposed death, described the bunker's completion. Final construction phase finished, living quarters ready, communication systems operational. Team of 28 loyal men established. We have succeeded where the Reich failed. We endure. Entries continued irregularly through 1958, documenting supply, management, and rationing. Communication with contacts in Argentina and Paraguay using coded shortwave radio. Financial transactions through Swiss intermediaries, recruitment of additional personnel from German expatriate communities, intelligence gathering on South American political developments, physical training and military drills maintaining combat readiness. The entries revealed Rahn hadn't simply hidden. He'd established an operational SS unit in exile, maintaining military discipline and preparing for what? The journal's tone shifted over the years from defiant determination in 1946 to resignation by 1958. The final entry dated August 15, 1958 read, 13 years, no signal, no revival. The cause is lost. I ordered disbandment. Those who wish may return to civilian life. I remain. Artifact recovery provided physical evidence supporting the journal. Teams systematically cataloged items in all chambers. Personal effects from the barracks included German military identification books for 27 individuals. The journal mentioned 28, suggesting one book was lost or removed. Cross-referencing these names against post-war records revealed startling patterns. 22 of the 27 men were officially listed as killed in action or missing during February to May 1945. Only 5 were recorded as surviving the war, and those 5 had supposedly immigrated to Argentina between 1946 to 1948. The maps in the command center showed detailed notations. Safe houses in Chilean cities supply routes through mountain passes, contacts in Argentine border towns, and escape routes to Paraguay. Red pins marked locations along the Chilean coast, potential evacuation points, radio equipment analysis. Bioelectronics experts confirmed the Telefunken transmitter was capable of long-range communication with Argentine and Paraguayan stations. Examination of the frequency settings showed the radio had been tuned to frequencies used by German commercial stations in the 1940s to 1950s, legitimate businesses that could relay coded messages. The most significant discovery came in the 6th chamber, the sealed room. It contained financial records, ledgers documenting transactions from 1946 to 1958, showing currency transfers from Swiss accounts to Chilean and Argentine intermediaries, totaling over $2 million in period currency. The ledgers listed payments for supplies, equipment, construction materials, and security arrangements, likely bribes to local officials who ensured the bunker remained undiscovered. Also in the sealed room, personal letters between Rahn and contacts in Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. The letters, written in German, used coded language but clearly, discussed coordinating SS escape networks, managing shared financial resources, and maintaining communication among scattered Nazi fugitives. One letter from 1952 addressed to Rahn from a comrade in Buenos Aires mentioned coordinating with the organization, likely Odessa, the rumored SS escape network, though that term wasn't explicitly used. Forensic evidence from human remains provided final confirmation. In a separate chamber, accessed through a concealed passage, investigators found a small room used as a burial site. One set of remains lay in a simple concrete grave marked with a metal plaque. SS-Brigadeführer, adorned 1902 to 1958. True bis zum Tod. Loyalty unto death. Dental records from the skull were compared to Rahn's Waffen-SS medical file, which included comprehensive dental charts, created during his 1941 physical examination. The match was perfect. 13 dental markers corresponded exactly, including 2 gold crowns on molars and a distinctive filling pattern. DNA analysis provided additional confirmation. Chilean authorities obtained DNA samples from Rahn's living granddaughter, Marguerite's daughter, who agreed to testing after learning of the discovery. Mitochondrial DNA from the Chilean remains matched the granddaughter's maternal line with 99.8% probability. The remains were definitively Rahn's. Cause of death was determined through forensic pathology. The skeleton showed no trauma, bullet, wounds, or violence. Age estimation placed death around 55 to 57 years old, consistent with Rahn dying in 1957 to 1958 at age 55 to 56. Toxicology was impossible after decades of decomposition, but the journal's final entries mentioned declining health and accepting my fate. He likely died from natural causes or possibly suicide. The evidence was overwhelming. Rahn had lived in the Chilean bunker for 13 years, but investigators still needed to answer the critical question: how did he escape Dresden's firestorm and build this mountain fortress? The reconstruction begins in late 1944. Rahn, commanding a shattered SS division and recognizing Germany's inevitable defeat, began planning his escape. Unlike many SS officers who hoped for miracle weapons or negotiated surrenders, Rahn was a pragmatist with engineering expertise. He understood that survival required preparation, resources, and a location where nobody would search. Between November 1944 and January 1945, Rahn made 3 documented trips to Switzerland, officially for medical treatment, but actually establishing financial infrastructure. He opened accounts under the alias Otto Richter, deposited gold looted from occupied territories, and arranged for long-term fund management through Swiss intermediaries. These accounts would finance his post-war operations for 13 years. Simultaneously, Rahn identified 12 men from his division. The transferred soldiers Dietrich mentioned, who possessed critical skills: engineers, construction workers, radio operators, medics. Between December 1944 and February 1945, he secretly transferred these men to a supposed administrative assignment in Munich. But they actually received false papers and traveled via Ratlands to Chile, arriving in late January, early February 1945. Why Chile? Rahn had visited South America in 1936 as part of a German military delegation assessing potential strategic locations. He had identified the Chilean Andes as ideal, remote, defensible, accessible from Argentina's established German communities and outside major Nazi hunting focus areas. The specific mountain site was selected during that 1936 trip. The 12 advance team members, using Rahn's pre-positioned funds, purchased equipment in Santiago through legitimate German business fronts, hired local labor told they were building a mining facility, and began excavating in early February 1945. Chilean authorities, if they noticed at all, assumed it was German commercial mining, common in that era. The escape from Dresden was carefully planned. On February 13, 1945, Rahn didn't conduct reconnaissance. His staff car drove west, not east, toward the American lines. The Americans were still 120 kilometers from Dresden, and the route passed through chaos. Refugee columns, retreating Wehrmacht units, bombed roads, perfect cover. Rahn, his adjutant and driver Koch, changed into civilian clothes pre-positioned in the vehicle. They abandoned the staff car near Chemnitz, 60 kilometers from Dresden, and continued on foot and by commandeered civilian transport toward the Swiss border, 150 kilometers southwest. The journey took 3 weeks, blending with refugee flows. Using false papers Rahn had prepared months earlier, they crossed into Switzerland in early March 1945, entering as displaced persons fleeing the war. Switzerland, overwhelmed with refugees, processed them quickly. Rahn accessed his Swiss accounts, obtained legitimate travel documents under the Richter identity, and booked passage to Argentina. They departed Genoa in April 1945 aboard a merchant vessel. Arriving in Buenos Aires in May 1945, the same month, Germany officially surrendered. From Buenos Aires, Rahn traveled to Chile via legitimate border crossing, meeting his advance team in Santiago. Together, they proceeded to the mountain site, where excavation was 60% complete. The remaining 15 men who formed Rahn's unit arrived. Over the following year, SS personnel who'd escaped Europe via various ratlins and received coded instructions to reach Chile. Why did previous theories fail? Because everyone assumed Dresden's firestorm killed or scattered all senior officers present in the city. Soviet investigators, overwhelmed with thousands of casualties, issued Rahn's death certificate based on circumstantial evidence without confirming remains. Nobody searched for an SS general who was already officially dead. The biggest surprise, Rahn's bunker wasn't just a refuge, it was a command post for a network. The sealed rooms documents revealed he coordinated financial support for dozens of SS fugitives across South America, maintained communications with other Nazi exile groups, and functioned as a paymaster and logistics coordinator. The bunker was headquarters for an SS mutual aid organization that operated until 1958. Why disband in 1958? Multiple factors. Rahn's declining health, aging equipment, becoming irreparable, crew members dying or choosing civilian reintegration, and the realization that Germany's post-war recovery under democratic government meant no revived Reich would vindicate their continued resistance. By 1958, maintaining the bunker served no purpose except Rahn's pride. What happened to the other crew members? The journal's final entries mention dispersal to civilian identities in Argentina and Chile, most likely integrated into German expatriate communities, married, took civilian jobs, and lived out their lives quietly. Some may still have descendants. In South America, unaware of their grandfather's pasts, what happened to Rahn after 1958? The burial date suggests he died shortly after writing the final journal entry. Possibly suicide rather than face old age in a mountain bunker that had become a tomb for his ideology. His loyal subordinates buried him with military honors in the concealed chamber, sealed the bunker, and dispersed. The evidence is conclusive. SS-Brigadeführer Adorn faked his death during Dresden's destruction, escaped to Chile, built a mountain fortress with pre-positioned resources and loyal followers, commanded an operational SS unit in exile for 13 years, coordinated support for Nazi fugitives across South America, and died in 1958, having never faced justice for his role in the Nazi war machine. The official Soviet death certificate had been wrong, not through incompetence, but because nobody verified remains in Dresden's chaos. And Rahn had planned his escape perfectly, exploiting the firestorm to disappear, while investigators assumed he'd perished like thousands of others. Adorn's daughter Marguerite died in 2019, 1 year before the Chilean bunker was discovered. She lived her entire life believing her father had died defending Dresden in 1945, never knowing he'd escaped to South America and lived 13 more years in a mountain fortress. Whether learning the truth would have brought closure or opened wounds is unknowable. The Rahn case demonstrates that successful Nazi escapes required more than luck. They demanded planning, technical expertise, financial resources, and ruthless execution. Rahn's engineering background, preparation beginning months before defeat, and willingness to sacrifice his official identity created one of the most successful disappearances of the post-war era. For victims of the Nazi regime and those who fought to defeat it, cases like this carry bitter weight. Rahn commanded an SS division responsible for combat. Deaths on the Eastern Front, he should have faced trial in 1945, but instead built a mountain, refuge, and lived comfortably for another 13 years, dying naturally rather than facing justice. The Chilean bunker stands today as a protected historical site. Chilean authorities are converting it into a museum, documenting both the escape and the broader history of Nazi fugitives. Rahn's remains have been exhumed and are held in Chilean government custody. Germany has requested repatriation for potential war crimes investigation. Though Rahn's death makes prosecution impossible, the 27 crew members who served in Rahn's mountain fortress remain largely unidentified. Some likely lived peacefully in South America until natural deaths. Others may have committed crimes beyond military service. The investigation continues. Adorn executed a nearly perfect escape through preparation, deception, and exploiting chaos. He built something extraordinary through skill and determination. Whether that deserves acknowledgement or condemnation depends on perspective. What's certain, he succeeded where most fugitives failed, and the truth stayed hidden for 75 years in granite tunnels beneath the Chilean Andes. Sometimes justice takes 3/4 of a century, sometimes it never arrives at all. Sometimes mountains keep secrets until rescue workers find ventilation shafts that shouldn't exist. Rahn's bunker is no longer secret, but the man who built it avoided the consequences. He deserved